Hello, hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World. Should we put a bit of music on? There's a bit of music. How's that? I'm your host, Kane Sims, as always. Should have cleared my throat before we started. Amateur mistake, schoolboy error. Welcome to VUX World. Today I have an epic conversation coming up with Nick Allgaier, who is the product manager for digital assistants and conversational AI at Lufthansa. And we're going to have a really great conversation about how you go about scaling your conversational AI practice. Lufthansa and Nick's team are dealing with immense scale. They have chatbots that support multiple different brands across multiple different regions. And they've got some really, really great results they've been achieving over the last few years. So if you're interested in how you go from zero to hero, how you go from creating one use case to scaling that across a large organization and multiple brands, then this is going to be an epic conversation for you. Before we get there, though, I want to give a shout out to our presenting sponsor for this episode, Intel. Now, you probably might not have heard, unless you heard the last episode of the VUX World podcast, that there is such thing as an AI PC. What's an AI PC? Well, an AI PC is a PC that runs the Intel Core Ultra processor, and that essentially what that is, it has a neural processing unit. All right, you think about GPUs and you think about CPUs. This is an NPU, neural processing unit. It's a brand new processor from Intel, and what it does, it runs on your PC. And all of the kind of things that you need to do in the programs that you use that use AI and machine learning, it essentially offloads the processing of that to the NPU. The Intel Core Ultra processor is lightning fast, faster than most GPUs at processing these AI workloads. It's been created specifically for AI workloads. And so, for example, Nick's joining me today on Zoom. Nick is using, as you'll see shortly, a blurred effect on his background. All right, now that requires machine learning, because if Nick moves to the side like this or to the side like that, then it needs to follow him around. It needs to make sure that the area behind him is always blurred, and so it uses machine learning to track his movements and track his body, track his head, so that it makes sure that the right areas are always blurred. Now, if you're running Zoom and you're running multiple different programs like Adobe and others, the strain that these machine learning workloads put on your computer can be pretty drastic. That's why you'll find your machine runs slow sometimes when you're trying to do a lot of stuff on it. If you offload your AI workloads like Zoom and like Adobe, and you don't have to do anything about this, by the way, this is all built into the Intel Core Ultra processor, then you'll find that not only will those programs run far more smoothly and far faster, but you will get far more battery life and far more performance out of your laptop. So if you are in the process of renewing your fleet of laptops in your organization, and you manage the fleet of laptops in your organization, check out Intel's Core Ultra range of processors. It also comes with Intel's V Pro, which is a secure and fully managed platform for you to manage your whole fleet remotely. If you're interested in finding out more, go to vux.la/Intel. vux.la/Intel. Thank you, Intel, for sponsoring VUX World. And without further ado, let's welcome today's guest, shall we? Nick, welcome to VUX World, my friend.
Hi, Shane. How are you? Great to be here.
I'm good. Yeah, nice to see you again. I'm very well. How are you?
Yeah, pretty good. Lots of exciting things happening.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, all good.
Good. What exciting things in particular are happening at the moment?
Well, there's of course lots of talks around where to use generative AI. We are also at Lufthansa Group looking into what channels we should offer next in our conversational space. So lots of cool discussions happening right now.
Yeah, the whole where to use generative AI question is a very pertinent one that maybe we can get into. But yeah, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate it. Thank you for speaking out on Pars as well. I know that was a short notice kind of fly and flop type of situation, but appreciate you turning up and bossing it over there. For those that don't know, I mean, I imagine loads of people who are tuning in know Lufthansa, but for those that don't know, why don't you give us a quick lowdown on Lufthansa and your role and position there?
Yeah. So let me start my position. I'm the product manager for our conversational AI development in the B2C space for our Lufthansa Group hub airlines. So our hub airlines are Lufthansa, Swiss, Austrian, and Brussels Airlines. And whatever we do in the conversation space, so be it chatbots, be it voice bots, for all of these projects, sooner or later, I'm basically coming in and supporting the teams and provide strategic directions on where we want to go with those channels throughout Lufthansa Group.
Nice.
And Lufthansa Group, is also contains a few more airlines. So there's also Eurowings, Air Dolomiti. If you read the news, we also now are in the process of buying another airline in Italy. But for my area of expertise, our core focus is the four biggest hub airlines.
Nice. Yeah, I'd never come across Eurowings, but I've been looking in the last couple of weeks because I'm flying to Germany in October a couple of times, and Eurowings is everywhere. It's pretty much the only flight I can get to Germany from the UK. So everything's Eurowings. So I might get to try your chatbot then potentially in the next few weeks.
It's not in use for Eurowings,
All right.
but in case you will be flying on Lufthansa, this Austin or Brussels, then you would come across our bot sooner or later. Yeah. At least you would come across the advertising for our bot at some point.
Nice. Yeah, I think I'm flying Lufthansa at the kind of towards the end of October. So there you go. I will do my best to watch out for the Lufthansa chatbot. Maybe it would be nice to start with where did all of this begin with Lufthansa? I alluded to the fact in the beginning that you're operating at great scale, and we'll get to where you're at now. But perhaps we can start with like where did all of this start?
Yeah, so we did not start at great scale. So much is fair to say. There were different bot initiatives in 2016, 2017. When the first wave of chatbots basically started. So one about a colleague of mine had developed where we just basically wanted to see it doesn't make sense to offer like a best price search through a conversational interface. And then another couple of colleagues and we worked on a concept of how could we use chatbots in customer service? How could we make use of that new technology? Then at some point, Lufthansa Group decided to join forces and develop one bot together. And then we tried to figure out where would we provide the most value, and decided that in self-service, and that's support for flight irregularities. So in case your flight gets cancelled or drastically delayed, there was no self-service for that option or for that situation. And then we picked up that use case, shaped that out, and started developing it. And then took it from there. So that was still on Facebook Messenger. And then we kept on adding use cases. We kept on adding a web chat channel. And at some point had a chat on, should we continue developing all of this on our own, or should we be making use of a conversational AI platform? We decided to go with a platform approach, and then COVID hit us, and we basically could scrap most of the developments that we had done beforehand, because all of a sudden the questions of our customers changed 180 degrees. So it was not important anymore how many bags you were allowed to bring, but you had to figure out, well, where could you actually still go? What kind of mask did you need? What kind of vaccination is required? So the questions of our customers turned drastically, and we basically did an entire restart of our bot development, looking at what exactly is it that our customers need right now, and then started building up upon that again.
And that must have been a challenge, because I remember at that time when people could start traveling again with COVID, you couldn't find the right information anywhere. I went to Portugal. I was supposed to go to Portugal. And I was on the UK government website all morning before we flew. And I'm checking everything that I needed to do. You've got to have your passenger locator forms completed. You've got to have your COVID vaccination. You've got to have your passport, your boarding, all that kind of stuff. Got to the airport, showed all the documentation, showed everything, boarding cards, the lot, got down to the gate, and literally there's a pane of glass in between me and the plane. And we got right to the very front, and we give the boarding cards and passport to the person who was checking us on, and they said, have you got your negative COVID test? I was like, what negative COVID test? No, you can't get on the plane without a negative COVID test. I was like, that didn't exist anywhere in any of the research I did all morning. So it must have been a nightmare for you because you're having to keep on top of this for all countries that you fly to and all
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. That must have been hell.
And there were two um, two complexities here, I would say, or two main ones. First one is you had to give the right information to all of your customers, but the problem then on top of that was that information changed every other week.
Mm.
So and we had to adjust our schedules accordingly. So one week a country opened up, changed the rules of necessary documentation that you needed, but then another wave of COVID hit, and then the country decided not to allow flights in anymore. So we had to adjust our flight schedules all the time. Customers needed to rebook or refund their tickets all the time. And we just needed to desperately find ways to alleviate that stress and volume from our manual customer service operations.
Mm. And I suppose that's related in many cases to best practice for how to actually operationalize these assistants, because I'm sure you come across the Air Canada situation where somebody was told that if they book onto a flight, they would be eligible for a refund if they couldn't make it, if someone died or whatever. And I think it turns out that their grandmother died or something like that. They went back, they tried to get a refund. Air Canada was like, no, that's not our policy, you can't have one. They were like, right, well, the chatbot told me that I was entitled to one. And then Air Canada were kind of in this situation of saying, well, the chatbot doesn't represent us. And in the end, the courts ruled against Air Canada and said that the chatbot is a direct reflection of you. And if it's telling people something that it shouldn't, then that's your responsibility. It wasn't even a generative AI chatbot. It was just manually hard coded. But I think that gets to the question I was going to ask, is that in the Air Canada instance, they've got content within their chatbot platform or infrastructure that is hard coded content, and they have to go into the chatbot to update it. So if the website changes, the chatbot doesn't change. They've got to go into the chatbot to update that content. You're in a situation during COVID, and you've probably got other situations currently where information's changing all the time. You need to keep up to date with it. Your website's going to be changing all the time. The advice that your agents on the phones are going to be changing all the time. How do you approach that? Do you take the approach of you have everything in your chatbot hard coded as content, or do you have another way that you recommend that people get content in and out of chatbots?
What we didn't have back then was a centralized, let's say, content database. Especially in those days, it was pretty hands-on, trying to make sure that we bring the latest information to the different channels. We had a content team supporting us, and we had a very simple to use interface for our FAQs in particular. Also built with that, having that in mind, that we quickly need to change content, and our more technical developers might not be available. So we need to find something that works also for non-technical users and that could quickly be deployed without complex deployment processes. So we basically had a separated knowledge storage for our conversational AI development, which was not perfectly in sync with our website, but around that time there were many, let's say, pragmatic decisions that we had to take.
Mm. And retrieval augmented generation wasn't really a thing back then.
No. And nobody had heard of ChatGPT back then, or of generative AI at all. Yeah.
Yeah, and even if they had, you know, you mentioned earlier on that, debating where's the best place to use generative AI. Obviously, retrieval augmented generation is one of the top use cases. However, when you're in a situation like you were in, and even the situation that you're in day to day, there is zero space for hallucination in that instance, is there? You can't tell somebody that, oh, actually, you don't need a COVID test to go to Portugal, and they get to the airport and they're just about to get on a Lufthansa plane, and it turns out they do. That's a bad situation, So in terms of how you're thinking about generative AI, is retrieval augmented generation something is that something you're actively doing and testing? How are you thinking about that particular use case?
RAG in particular, it's something that we're in the process of trying, but the debate is exactly as you pointed out, like how much, to what extent do we want to make sure that we give the precise answers? Or how can we enforce that there is as little hallucination as possible? And if you are super strict in that regard, how much of the generative AI aspect do you still benefit from? So, I mean, it's a thin line, right? If you let a large language model on the long leash and you don't care about hallucinations, the experience is going to be nice, and you'll have lots of nicely crafted text, but you don't exactly know how reliable those answers are. If you go the more deterministic approach, or if you go the full deterministic approach, you don't need generative AI. If you go the full probabilistic approach and say, hey, I want to have nicely crafted answers, completely tailored to the question, then there's always that risk of hallucination. So that's why we are testing it out on a very small scale. We do have generative AI in use, though, in our bot nonetheless, and in a much less risky, much less risky approach, which still bring us lots of benefits. And that's, for instance, summarization of long user inputs. So we don't have this was a bit too long for me, can you rephrase that anymore? But okay, I understood. This is what you meant. Let me look into this.
Yeah, that's good. I think certainly in your kind of industry, that is a great use case, and classification in general is a good use case. Like obviously you've probably got some pretty strong NLU models, which is great, but there's going to be places where there's ambiguous input. There's going to be places that are not classified for whatever reason. It's out of the scope of the conversation. And I think that's probably an area where generative AI can help, as well as the long form utterances. It's that kind of like helping the model deal with some of the complexities that traditional ML models struggle with.
Yeah, there's 2 points in particular where we use it on top. So as I said, one is summarization of long user input. The other is also, I would say, like it's the backup NLU. So if our main NLU hasn't detected any intent, and it's basically a default intent is detected, we do a call to a large language model and said, hey, we couldn't find anything. These are the areas that I'm knowledgeable about. So can you find a match here? Which is also working pretty well. So as you said, classification basically, then summarization. And we also started using it for summarization of entire transcripts. So once we hand over the chat to an agent, so that the agent doesn't have to go to the history of the conversation, but basically gets a quick summary that they can just briefly go through, and they get the content of what happened before, why is the customer now talking to an agent, and so on, which also is a perfect example of a very technically very simple use case that can provide value quickly.
Definitely. And when you're doing things like summarization, and even in the example where you're using it as a backup NLU, are you, for example, let's take the summarization, are you taking a long user input, summarizing it, and sending that back to the NLU? Or are you taking the long input, summarizing it, and then asking the NLU to place it in the appropriate intent based on what you provide it, and then you just trigger the response or stage of the journey as if that intent is just being matched? If that makes sense.
I didn't implement it myself. I would have to check for the perfect answer with my team again, but I think we do both. So in one case, if it's not understood, I know that we do the API call, check if we can get basically an intent proposal, and then go with that proposal. If we summarize the utterance and then rerun it through the NLU.
Right.
So we basically go both ways.
Yeah. That's perfect. And what kind of impact has this had then? Is there a way that you're sort of tracking this kind of stuff?
Yeah.
Have you got anything you could tell us in terms of like the impact it's had?
Yeah. So we have like roughly 20% of of our sessions go through a generative AI call at some point. So we support around about 20% of our conversations with generative AI by now. And I think the biggest impact that we've seen so far has been the reduction of the non-detected intent. So in the category of we don't know what it is, we managed to reduce that by around about 90%.
Wow, that's wicked. And has there been an impact on, for example, like average handle time in terms of when you're passing over to it? I know it's seconds, it's not necessarily going to kind of cut a call in half, but being able to give an agent a summary and say, this is Kane, he's talking about a flight delay, here's the issue, crack on type of thing. Has there been any sort of impact there, or is that kind of a marginal gain?
No, that use case was launched just a couple of weeks ago, so I don't think that we have fully reliable information yet, but the feedback from the agents has been that they're definitely saving time. And I wouldn't say it's marginal. So there is a good amount of time that is saved. Plus, I would also say it gives the agent a completely different start to the conversation, right? They can start the conversation differently because they know already more about what has happened. That brings me to one more use case that was launched, I believe, last week. Now, the first response that our chat agents can give to our customers is also supported by generative AI. So it's based on the summarization, the handover reason, and then some additional information on the customer. So instead of, hi, my name is Nick, how can I help you today? It's more hi, Kane, I understand you're contacting us regarding your rebooking for this afternoon. My name is Nick, let me look into your rebooking, which, if you ask me, also makes a whole lot of difference from a conversational perspective or from an experience perspective, because you feel much better understood. And like, who likes those situations where you have to start explaining again why you're contacting now?
It's the worst. It's literally one of the worst things that can happen. Does my head in.
Yeah.
So am I right in thinking what you're saying there is that so you'll use generative AI to summarize the conversation, hand over that conversation to an agent so that they can pick up from where the conversation left off. But that last bit there is that you also use generative AI to turn that summary into a starting point for the conversation. So the agent, if it's on chat, for example, has a response that they can send off straight away in line with what you've just mentioned.
Yeah. And of course, here there's a human in the loop. So the agent can decide if they want to use that proposal or not, or they can also use it and edit it before they send it to the customer. So that is not mandatory, but let's say very well appreciated by the agent.
Oh, I bet, yeah, definitely. I mean, and that's a great example of sort of like completing the picture, isn't it? You've got generative AI helping where it's right to do so on the front end, and you've got generative AI helping in areas where it's right to do so on the back end. So you're kind of like there's a completing the picture there, which is great.
Yeah.
So tell everyone a little bit about kind of the sort of scale that you're operating at then. So Lufthansa is a massive company. You've got lots of sub-brands, as you mentioned. These chatbots are operating in these sub-brands as well. Maybe it'd be nice to hear a little bit about kind of, like what is the kind of setup over there? What kind of scale are you operating at? And just give us a general picture in terms of what the operation looks like.
Yeah. Let me start with maybe some facts and figures. So over the last 12 months, in our chat interfaces, we had roughly 10.5 million conversations. We had peak days where we had 360,000 conversations in a single day.
Wow.
I think the record so far has been a bit more than 10,000 concurrent sessions. One rebooking every 5 seconds in one of the peaks.
Wow.
Which I found to be quite remarkable.
That's amazing.
And then we have one more use case integrated into our IVRs, our phone lines, that has been used roughly 1 million times over the last 12 months. And all of this led to a little less than 1 million flight alternatives that we offer to our customers. We had around about 250,000 rebookings, 60,000 refunds were issued, which basically is the equivalent of millions and millions of euros, pounds, sterling,
Wow.
or whatever currency you please, refunded back to our customers. And also, for instance, 250,000 food vouchers that we passed on to our customers through our conversational interfaces.
Wow. So that's 10,
And yeah,
10 million per year, you were saying there on chat.
yeah, over the last 12 months, it was a bit more than 10 million. But I believe that this year we are going to end with a bit more than that.
Wow. And where is that in terms of a percentage of volume? Because that's a large number. In terms of the overall Lufthansa contact, is this playing a major role?
Yeah, I'm not at liberty to dive into all the shares yet, but we can definitely say it's significant.
Wicked. That's really good. And that just shows, that like it works, doesn't it? I think there's still quite a lot of people who are sort of on the fence a little bit about this. And it's got to be said as well that generative AI hasn't actually been the thing that's propelled all of this forward. As you mentioned, that you've only just started releasing generative AI, and you're doing 10 million conversations a year without it, sort of thing. So it's proven it's working, isn't it?
Yeah, but I also think that you have to be considering the right thing to make it work. So I keep on saying that there are three main areas that in which you have to invest, and where your development focus has to lie on. Otherwise, you're not contributing to success. So the first area is volume. So all of your developments are only going to provide significant value if you have enough volume, if you make sure that that people actually use it. So make people use it is like the first category for me. The second category is make it work. So your development teams will have to work on solution rate, improving particular use cases, fine-tuning them further end to end. Also stability. Stability was one of our learnings. You have to have, if you have a peak heavy business as ours in customer service, you have to have a system in place that can handle load peaks. So 360,000 conversations in a day, 10,000 concurrent conversations. That's not easy. So second area is make it work, and the third area is make people come back. So make sure that it's a pleasant experience, that there's actually high satisfaction in that channel. Because only if you have all of these three areas covered, you'll have success at scale. So let's say you don't have the volume, but you have a well-working bot that people like, then yeah, it's working, it's liked, but it's not contributing the value that it could. So you're not making enough return on investment on your development. If the solution rate is low, many people use it and maybe like it, but your bottom line is not going to be impacted. And if you don't have satisfaction, you have lots of people using it, and it's fulfilling its purpose, but it's not liked. So people are unlikely to use it time and time again. So you have a one-time usage focus, and then you won't see the long-term ROI that you're hoping for.
It's funny because this is exactly the framework that we used to use with building Alexa skills, because it's all about, first of all, you have to let people know that it exists, and you have to get people into it, because they won't find it themselves. Amazon didn't make it easy to find and discover skills, so you've got to make people know about it. You've got to get people into it. Secondly, is you've got to make sure that it's actually a good experience. If anyone's ever tried the Domino's skill from 2018, it was a nightmare because you could only order something that you'd put in your
Oh, that was
favorite.
a pizza Domino's.
Yeah, Domino's pizza.
Okay.
Yeah, you could only ever order something that you've put in your favorites basket. So I was hell-bent on exploring these skills. So I would use all of them and I would test them all to make sure they worked. So you had to go into Domino's, the website. You have to collect whatever it is you want to order, put it into your favourites basket, and then once you've got a favourites basket, you can then use the Alexa skill to order from your favourites basket. It was the most backwards, horrible solution you've ever seen in your life. So it just didn't work. And so that was the kind of second thing. And then the third thing was you can't ever get towards monetization. Nobody's going to pay you for an Alexa skill unless they go back and use it time and time again and build habits around it. So you've got to get people coming back. So I've spoke to you a number of times about that exact. You've told me this a number of times, and the penny's only just dropped now. That actually that's exactly the framework that we were discussing with Alexa skills.
And it sounds oversimplified, but it really boils down to these 3 points. And we saw that one of our breakthrough moments was the first category in volume. We had something that we knew that worked and that we had tested with dozens and dozens of people, but we just didn't see the volume. So we had crafted an end-to-end rebooking experience, had gone through so many user testings, fine-tuned the experience, and we knew it worked, but people just didn't use it until we placed it correctly. And for us, one of those breakthrough moments was putting it into our flight cancellation emails and SMS. And all of a sudden, we realized that's where the people, of course, get the information. Your flight was canceled. Do you need an alternative? Click here in simple terms. And then we saw our user numbers skyrocket and saw transactions taking off. And that was also the moment where the organization realized, oh, we might be onto something here.
It's funny, isn't it? So it takes the organization to take a bit of a leap, which is to get funnel traffic into it for it to properly realize if it's working, because that's when you can demonstrate value, isn't it?
And I mean, it's again a thin line, right? How, if it's this, let's say, the golden triangle of conversation at AI at scale, how well do you want the 2 areas of solution rate and satisfaction be shaped already before you're willing to give volume onto the system? So how good does it have to be for you to be confident as an organization to say, no, now we're okay with thousands or hundreds of thousands of users? And I would say, luckily, we had a few brave executives that back then were willing to say, no, let's go. But yeah, it also takes a few bold decisions and confidence. And I would say, at some point, sooner or later, you have to try out how it works. So don't focus on solution rate and satisfaction for too long. And the one thing where I'm quite a strong opponent, I often hear, the most important thing you need to do is when building a bot is craft a persona. If you look at these 3 categories, I would claim persona is mostly a soft factor in the 3rd category. So satisfaction, crafting a pleasant experience. I often try, if I'm thinking about like a controversial opinion, I try to simplify the question for myself. So let's consider that you have 2 bots that you speak to. One sounds very robotic, but does exactly what you want. And the other one sounds extremely pleasant, but can do nothing for you. Which one are you likely to use again? And of course, I'm not saying that persona is not important at all. It is one of the 3 areas, but persona without solution rate and volume is worth nothing. Maybe you're able to contribute to your brand, but that's about it.
Yeah, it's a very interesting area, persona, because I remember again years ago having debates with people around the value of persona, and at the time it was most people would create a persona based on just stuff that didn't really matter. It was like a persona document was like background, background into the person. This is Susie. Her dad's a doctor, and mum's a chemist, and it's like she's from Hereford, and it's like, what relevance is she's studying art, but really she fancies herself.
Her last holiday,
Yeah.
during her last holiday, she went to.
Yeah, she's got a fish called Wanda, and it's like, oh my god. So, and it just means nothing. Well, I think that Rebecca Evanhoe and Diana Deeble have got a good framework, which I think is, it's not a persona framework. They call it a personality framework, and I think it works better because essentially it's all about basically like how human do you want this thing to be? Should it be superhuman and called Dave and try and convince you that it's a human, or should it be quite clearly super robotic? And then in terms of the tone it has, should it be a bit kind of like, should it be really formal, or should it be a bit more casual? And that's kind of the extent of it. It goes a bit deeper than that, but that's pretty much the extent of it. And it's just enough to align teams together on what the tone should be, but it's not overkill.
And we have an interesting discussion now also happening. How do you add this, let's say, tonality or personality also into your generative AI development? So in the past, you basically created scripts, you had copywriters to write texts, right? But the more you prompt, the more important it will be that not only the scripts have a certain tonality, but everything that is also created through a generative AI sounds alike.
Yeah.
And then how do you combine that with the values and tonality of a brand? And in our case, with 4 different brands. So in how far is one airline supposed to sound different to the second, to the third, to the fourth? And how can you make sure that nonetheless you don't have 4 completely different bots, because technically they're the same?
Yeah, it's a good point. I mean, yeah, it's an interesting area. I mean, I'd like to see some research done into it, basically, in terms of like, I suppose one area is the value of the persona in the first place, because I know companies that have got pretty successful deployments and they haven't thought 1 minute about persona design, but it works. As you said, it's got volume, it's got kind of a solution rate, and sometimes a solution rate can be good enough for it to be a satisfactory experience, if it works.
There's an interesting paradox also in our use case. So if you have a flight that got canceled, you don't want to spend a lot of time sorting it out, right? So ideally, you spend as little time with the AI agent as possible. So how important is the personality if your main concern is get me on that new flight as quickly as you can?
Yeah.
And we see that the usage of the bot is highest when there's the highest urgency. And from anecdotal evidence, but from what I've seen, people mostly don't care about it being superhuman or not superhuman. They want clear information. They want their issue resolved as quickly as possible. They want to be on their way. When I get feedback about our chat assistant, I've never gotten a feedback about, oh, I didn't exactly like how this was phrased. But I have gotten plenty of feedback of it was impressive how fast it was.
Yeah. And
which also leads me to the point. And I was a strong proponent of let's focus on solution rate first.
Yeah.
So craft something that really works, and then iron out the rest, or make sure, then fine tune the experience. But for me, the most important thing was creating something that really works.
Yeah. And that's aligned specifically as well to that framework, which is the first step is, what are the most important factors to achieving the goal? So in your case, one of the most important factors of that use case is speed. So therefore, that should guide the persona, if you like, for want of a better phrase, or personality. Everything should be aligned to speed. Your responses should be a lot shorter. Your API calls, you want to make sure that they're rapid, and it's like everything should be aligned to speed for that use case. Another use case, like I'm trying to plan a trip for my family on holiday. yes, the goal is to get the trip, but the qualities that you might want as part of that might be someone who is understanding and empathetic, and therefore that might actually require a different approach. Maybe you can have more dialogue because you want to develop more understanding. You want to find out where you've been in the past and what you like about the places that you've been at. You're adding more turns in the conversation, but that's kind of also part of achieving the goal. So it's not as if the persona is the persona and it sticks to what it is. Every single use case, really, you should be assessing this stuff to figure out. And it's not really even personality. It's part of design, basically, isn't it? It's like figuring out what are the main things that are important in this use case and how do we make sure that we deliver on it.
I fully agree.
Yeah. And I'm not saying that personality is not important before people start kicking off, because, I'm not saying it isn't important. I understand the theory around if you don't put any effort into persona, then potentially 1,000 people perceive things to be 1,000 different types of personas and stuff like that.
Sure.
But the thing is, in a contact center, if you've got 300 agents, every one of them's got a different personality.
That was exactly my argument also.
Yeah.
Internally.
Yeah. They're not all speaking in the brand voice and all that kind of stuff. It's like, anyway, but no.
But one more strong argument from my perspective for a well-crafted persona is also, let's not forget that, and it's sort of in line with what you're aiming at too. Let's not forget that every conversation is an opportunity to shape a branded experience.
Yes.
So every interaction can be perfectly in line with a brand. It's much harder to make sure that hundreds of agents speak the same language. But if you craft one experience centralized, you can fine-tune that experience on a centralized level and make sure that it's in line with your brand, with tonality, etc. So you have a great opportunity there to really craft a branded experience. And that for me is a strong argument that persona can contribute a lot of value too. Yeah,
agreed. Definitely agreed. There's a couple of things I definitely want to get to. So when I saw you speak in February at the Cognigy event, which was great, and there was a number of brands there all telling their stories. And one of the things I come away from that with, it was right around the time when I was doing kind of a bit of a general sort of appraisal of, how our company's approaching conversational AI. And there's this kind of, I think, drive by many organizations to just make sure that they throw things at AI because AI is here. And so everything has to be AI first. Everything needs to be done with AI. And it's kind of like sometimes you'll see or be involved in or have conversations about use cases that if you were to assess their potential success as a conversation, they wouldn't necessarily be that successful. There's probably other ways of doing it far better. And one of the things I come away from that conference with was the approach that many German companies are taking, or maybe European companies, is that they're not all thinking about AI for the sake of AI and let's have everything automated from end to end. The big trend that come away from that, which I think is right, and I've spoken about this many times before, is using AI at the front end as the front door. It's the first thing that everyone speaks to. It's the first thing that everyone hits. As soon as you can understand what that customer needs, you then just get them to the right place that can solve their problem. And you had a really good narrative around that. So I wonder if you can share a little bit about your approach.
Yeah, I discussed a couple of ideas within customer service last year, and then we basically shaped a little framework for ourselves. And that's a 5-step process that you basically should always go through, or that we want to go through to maximize, let's say, the customer contact experience. So the first step that you need to do is you need to identify who's actually talking to you and what is the transaction that the user is referring to. So in our case, who's the customer, what is the booking? And then the second step should be detecting what is the contact reason. Because if you know who the customer is and you know what the contact reason is, or you know what the booking is, you are able to find out already, do we have a self-service for this? Is this a high-value customer? Do we want to offer any automated self-service, yes or no? And then in the third step, you can steer the customer to the right channel. So maybe self-service or talk to a highly skilled agent, if it's a super valuable customer or super valuable booking. And if the customer decides not to use a self-service, or you steer him into a manual channel, then the fourth step should be you should prepare the conversation that is about to happen. So aggregate information, retrieve and aggregate. If you have the booking code in our case already and the name, why don't you start pulling up that booking in the backend system, aggregate all the information that is relevant to the agent who will then take over the conversation. So when is the booking? Did anything happen to the booking? So is it still in place? Was it canceled? Is it delayed? Whatever it might be. What is the value of this booking? So if a customer decides to or wants to refund the booking, how much money do they actually get back? Can they get money back? Who is the customer? All of these things to then go to the fifth step, assist your agent while they're in contact with your customers. So provide additional information and support during the handling. So that could be listening into the conversation, identifying intense entities, or supporting your agents with a RAG solution that brings up knowledge articles. So it's identifying the customer, detecting the contact reason, steering the customer to the right channel, preparing the conversation, then assisting during manual handling. And it has to be that sequence if you want to get the maximum out of the experience, because it already starts. If you haven't collected step 1 and 2 properly, then you will fail at step 3 to steer them to the right channel. And I think that's what you are also pointing out, that in many cases, people say, okay, and now use our chatbot, no matter whether they should or should not, and whether this use case is handled or not in the bot. It's like a last line of defense, and you're trying to bring everybody to that channel, hoping that it's going to deflect volume. But I think it's not smart enough. And then you can integrate AI in many different ways along that chain, and every organization probably will have a different, let's say, prioritization on what's most important. After you've identified your customer, you could, for instance, try to predict. Customers like that often contact us because of that. So it's like people like you algorithm as a predictive measure to maybe present the customer with completely different contact reasons. Mm. If you see a booking was canceled, you are most likely to have different questions than a customer that doesn't even have a booking yet. If you want to prepare the conversation, as we talked earlier, you might want to summarize the conversation for the agent, or you might want to use AI to find the best skilled agent for that. And then the last step in the assisting the agent step, there could be intent recognition, entity recognition, RAG. So there's all sorts of bits of AI that you can use along those 5 steps.
That's wicked. And do you have this approach on every channel, or is this when someone phones, or is it when someone talks to the chatbot? Like, is it across every channel or certain channels?
Let's say, so one outcome out of that concept was us critically reviewing the customer service journey, and that was one of the reasons why we started implementing our so-called help centers on our website and app, because we noticed we're missing out important information about the customers and their bookings before we lead them into manual handling. So now we have a process in place on our main contact channels, website and app, that steer customers completely along this process. And this is also a process that is very much aligned with the experience that you also experience in our chat assistant. So you're asked to identify yourself, then of course we will have to figure out what the intent is. And once you talk, or before you talk to a human agent, we will prepare the necessary information, and then agents will be assisted. But I would argue that the fifth part, assisting during the conversation, is still the weakest out of those 5.
Yeah, and I think that's a good approach as well, because the challenge of most AI systems is getting better now with generative AI, but still there's a problem, which is that if you try and be all things to all people, you're going to fall over. So if you say at the very outcome, at the very beginning of the conversation, how can I help? You're opening yourself up to every single possible permutation of every problem that someone might have. Now, with retrieval augmented generation, that's a way that many have tried to sort of get around that, which is as long as we've got the data, we'll answer the question. What all that misses out is that the question rarely is a question that receives an answer and that's it. The question is part of a journey that needs to culminate likely in some kind of action, and that action is often missed. So in the way you're explaining, it's usually good design practice anyway in general to you hide everything until it's relevant. And so initially what you're starting from is, have you got a booking or not? Because if you can separate people who've got bookings from those that don't have bookings, all of a sudden you've chopped out half of the things that you're going to need to try and understand.
Yeah.
And then your next thing is, okay, if you've got a booking, what's your booking number? And then you've got the flight, and then you can drill that down even further to what are the issues that people are likely to have with flights. And now all of a sudden you've probably got something that's like 500 potential queries, you've got that down to 10. And then you're in control of the conversation. So it's also a smart way of limiting dealing with all of the massive ambiguity that comes with all customer needs.
And that brings me to one more point. Also, something that I think that we got into a discussion on LinkedIn also. I always get a bit upset when I see that the benchmark of a conversational AI experience is measured in containment rate or automation rate. So let's say you press everybody into one channel, so it's your last line of defense. If you then measure containment rate, I think you're missing out on many important things. And also those two measures, containment rate or automation rate, which are typically closely related, are the easiest to manipulate. So containment rate, if you just don't escalate any chat, you can achieve an incredibly high containment rate that makes it look as if your bot was super smart, but it's basically a lever that is completely in your control, right? Where you can say, okay, offer to talk to an agent with every turn of the conversation, or don't offer it at all. That will have a drastic impact on containment rate. Automation rate, the same. Sorry, I don't understand is an automated reply. So in theory, you could automate 100% of your replies by always answering, sorry, I don't understand, but it's leading you nowhere. I understand, of course, you can go a more fine-tuned approach, but I think containment rate is, from my perspective, very dangerous. It's easy to manipulate, and if you just press everybody into one channel, so if you don't do the identification part, the detection and steering part, then it also is not the right way to look at optimizing the experience, because you might not want to contain your high-value customers. So if it's one of our top-tier customers in the chat experience, we do definitely not want that customer to go through all the process if there was a highly skilled agent available.
Yeah.
So I think it just falls short of a bigger picture.
It does, definitely. Containment is the worst metric. It's like, you're right, you can manipulate that to the nth degree. I think automation rate is a good metric, but the thing is that your chatbot is never going to automate everything from end to end. So you need to segment the escalations and handovers to an agent that are intentional, because some things require it. There's going to be escalations to agents that are unintentional. Someone's in a journey that should be automated and something happens and they escalate. Those are the ones you need to keep on top of. Same thing with abandons. But you need to take out the intentional escalations. And if you want to measure containment, that's also including the abandons as well. So it's incorrect. So you've got to take out that, and then, it's like, yeah.
And bringing me back to my 3 areas that we talked about earlier, automation rate would be the second category, right? Solution rate.
Yeah.
What if you highly automate something, but people hate it?
Yeah.
Then there's not going to be a long-lasting success of your product.
Yeah. definitely. I had one other question, which I've got two other questions. I know we're up on time. If you've got 5 minutes, I've got two other questions. The first question is how, in your situation, is unique, because for most organizations, when the business has a problem, usually it's generally bad. In your situation, when the business has a problem, it's actually not so bad for your chatbot. When there's strikes and things like that, it actually has a positive impact for you personally. So I wonder if you can share a little bit about that.
Unfortunately true, yes.
Yeah, because that's where you get a lot of volume from, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit of a tough spot to be in, indeed. So when we have the biggest operational problems, our conversational AI pays off the most. That's true. But I think it pays off in two ways. So first of all, we have end-to-end automation that contributes to our business case, of course. So whenever we have an automated rebooking and no agent has to do that rebooking, that is also money that we save. But I think it's also important to see that through that development, we also take pressure off our manual operations, so that the manual operations or our agents have more time to spend on the more difficult cases that cannot be automated. So yes, we are benefiting from that situation, but through our development, we're also helping the rest of the customers that do not use it to be helped faster.
Yeah.
But of course, that is not a great. It's hard to market that, of course. So I'd rather also do posts saying, "Oh, and we sold yet another ticket or ancillary service to our chats." And that's not the focus right now. But I'm also confident that that's a development that we'll also take. So I believe our conversational AI developments are going to be broader than they are right now, with less of a peak-driven customer service focus. But these are the biggest issues that we see in customer service. Since it's so peak-heavy, this is what we needed to address first and with the highest importance.
Yeah. And I think it's, there's lots and lots of benefits to conversational AI, as we've touched on a lot. You've got the ability to improve self-service and the ability to improve customer satisfaction. You've mentioned the ability to help colleagues out in the contact center so that they can deal with more pressing matters or more manual kind of matters. The other one that is overlooked often is the amount of data that you can get from these conversations and develop a real proper understanding of your customers and find issues with the business and processes that you wouldn't have had the ability to do before, because it's all just getting told to agents and they're kind of taking it in and not telling anyone about it or whatever. So it's like,
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah, and then the third one is or the other one is what we mentioned there, which is actually, it's almost like a business continuity thing. It's not why you do it necessarily, but a benefit of it is that if you do need to put in place a business continuity plan because something's going on operationally, then it's there and it's proven. It's, in your case, it's proven its value. I think it was in February when we spoke last, and there was an issue going on, and it was like, yeah, the chatbot's taking like 10,000 calls a day. It's brilliant. Yeah.
Yeah, true.
Yeah. So what about the last question then? Is obviously Lufthansa Group has many sub brands, as we alluded to at the beginning. You have one architecture that serves each of those brands in the same bot, basically. I'm wondering whether you can share an overview of how that looks essentially, and then two, any kind of tips for other companies that are of a similar size that have multiple brands underneath them in terms of how they should approach it.
So with respect to the setup, it is exactly as you pointed out. It's one technical solution, and that is localized for every airline, every language. So what is happening in the background is the use case for, let's say, flight rebookings is exactly the same. The language might be a bit different, so there might be some some wordings that are fine-tuned to the airlines. For instance, the greeting is different. Also, the group of agents that you will be talking to, they can also be different. But I would say 90% of the development is the same for all the 4 airlines that we're using the bot for.
And is that because you're using, is it fundamentally the same systems that you've got behind the scenes and the same processes?
Yes, yes, that's correct. So for all the transactional use cases, we're using the same system. For FAQs, we see more variety in answers. So for FAQ use cases, there can be different answers. There can be different products that one airline is offering that another one is not offering. So their localization is not as easy. For the transactional use cases, we have by now, luckily, a very unified backend setup. As for tips for organizations, I would say try to get as close to one optimal experience, and then see where you need to localize it instead of going the other way. So creating 4 different ones and then trying to bring them together. I think find an ideal process first and then derive your localization needs from that is the way that I would go personally.
What about language? So you mentioned language there. Are you manually translating languages? So if you've got a chatbot that's in Germany, but then another airline is operating out of Italy, are you kind of doing something where you're manually transcreating the models and the responses, and you've got one bot, but essentially you've still got variation because you've got different responses going? Or are you using generative AI in this case? Like how are you approaching translation?
So we decided some time ago that we will focus on our main languages, which are English and German. So if you look at the visitors on our website, those 2 languages cover by far the biggest chunk of our users. So we decided to have those 2 localizations that we maintain manually, with one exception already in the German. When there is a chat escalation on the German chat and there is no German-speaking agent available, we use machine translation to translate those texts. So a German-speaking customer can continue writing in German. It is being translated to English for the agent. The agent replies in English, and the reply reaches the customer in German. And that allowed us also to scale chat agents much quicker than having to recruit German-speaking agents around the world. All other languages, besides those 2 core languages, we will be using machine translation to translate those. Because we also noticed already with those 2 languages, whenever there is a text node that changes particular wordings, smaller use cases that you add, we would be spending so much time on manual translation that at some point we said we will focus on 2 languages and auto-translate everything from or to these 2 languages. And typically translation to or from English is working the best.
Right. So yeah, that's interesting, and it makes sense if it's sufficiently, the volume sufficient sort of thing. Like, the transcreation projects we've worked on, different languages have different nuances, So in German, you might talk formal or informal, whereas you don't really have that in the UK. So your kind of manual translation there tends to work pretty well.
We came across a few interesting things in the process, or let's say learning. Maybe also interesting here to share that in this round. So using machine translation, and not being able to give more context, that this is now, for instance, an airline context, can cause certain issues. So if you don't have the possibility to use certain lexicons where you can define certain translations. So the English word spelled HAM in our language would be Hamburg Airport.
Right.
But
yeah.
in regular English might not necessarily mean Hamburg Airport. So if you have a conversation between an agent and a user, and just HAM is used, that can definitely and did cause confusion. And we came across a few more things. But I also saw that now with the translation provider that we're currently using, we can define the level of formality, something that you pointed out that is super important in German, but also, for instance, in Spanish and French. So that is something that we needed to focus on, and having the ability to set certain lexicons or certain translations where you want to make sure that this is never translated to that.
Yeah.
Was very important for us.
Yeah.
But it's definitely a way for us to scale much faster without adding additional complexity. And we also saw, because there's often quickly a debate of, but other translations good enough? We did some tests and had non-German or German-speaking agents where German was not their native language, so German as a second language, speak to German-speaking customers, and we benchmarked these chats with machine-translated chats, and we saw that the machine-translated chats were sometimes, often, of superior quality.
Wow.
So, yes, if you have native speakers, you might have a good case in using your native speakers for those chats. But if it's a non-native speaker, then there might be a strong case to also look into machine translation, because the experiences are getting better and better.
And it's not going to get worse than it is now, is it?
Definitely. Plus, just looking at the complexity that you can save. I mean, if you want to maintain an intent model in X languages, that is X times the effort, right?
Yeah.
And if you want to spend a lot of time on that, and every language then has their particularities, and if a certain language just adds 5% additional volume, I don't believe it's necessarily worth focusing a lot of time and effort on these complexities.
Yeah, it just might mean that in some cases you might get the odd issue. You know, maybe it's a cultural thing, maybe it's a masculine, feminine, or something crazy like that. But like,
which happens in manual contexts as well.
Yeah, true. Yeah.
So that's another thing, right? What is the benchmark? Also, human agents can make mistakes, and mistakes happen.
Yeah.
And I think we should approach the digitization often with the same sort of generosity that we also use for the human comparison.
Yeah, I was speaking to I can't remember exactly who it was. It was on a podcast recently, and we were talking about how, for some reason, AI and technology, or AI specifically, is held to a standard that humans are not held to.
Yeah.
And it's like the AI translations have got to be perfect. The AI responses have got to be perfect. Everything's got to be absolutely perfect, but people aren't. So it's kind of like it's held to a different standard.
Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, Nick, this has been absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us and sharing your experience and your perspectives. There's been bags and bags and bags of insight in there. But one, in terms of how you're approaching generative AI. Two, your approach generally to how to construct these use cases and the three areas to prioritize, and your 5-step framework to resolving issues and getting people the help that they need. And yeah, I think it's been absolutely amazing. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure being here, and thanks for the invite.
No worries, no worries. We'll do it again sometime when you're at 25,000 or 25 million conversations a year.
Okay, challenge accepted.
Yeah. Brilliant. All right. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure, boys and girls. It's been, this is one to listen back to again because it's absolutely amazing. Thank you to Intel for sponsoring this episode of VUX World, and we'll see you on the next one. See you soon.